and you especially. So we will start now with the introduction. Generally speaking, archaeobotanical evidence for the Aegean Bronze Age economy is so far mainly known from the late Bronze Age Myceanean and Minoan palaces, as well as from the notable late Bronze Age Akrotiri in Santorini. However, little is known about the beginning of the early Bronze Age in Aegean in South Greece, and in particular from the Cyclades, which played a significant role in the emergence of civilization. This presentation will shed light on various aspects of early Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age in Cyclades, focusing on the published data as well as the recent data derived from new archaeobotanical research at the early and middle Bronze Age settlement of Koimisis, located in southern Therasia within the complex of Santorini Islands. The aim is to unravel dietary habits and the prehistoric plant diversity and paleoeconomy at the site, and its paleoenvironmental condition, which was unknown until now. Within this framework and as part of the Art-to-Plant research project, apart from the archaeobotanical study, an ethnographical research was also conducted in Therasia to investigate traditional cultivated crops, harvests of wild plants, including fruits and nuts, old-fashioned farming practices such as manuring, watering, etc., and the role of plants in the daily life of the inhabitants of Therasia until recent times. The research program, a diachronic perspective on rural architectural settlement sites and plant biodiversity of Therasia Island, with the acronym ARC2Plant, was funded by Hellenic Foundation for Research and Innovation to support postdoctoral researchers, in which principal investigator was Dr. Kostas Athanasiou from the Department of School of Architecture of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. The results of the program are to be announced soon in a special volume edited by Kostas Athanasiou and funded by the Research Committee of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. ARC2Plant is an innovative interdisciplinary collaboration of scientists from fields of architecture, agricultural sciences, and archaeology, archaeobotany that aims to reconstruct the unexplored rural, residential, and natural environment of Therasia Island and its two-way relationship with the modern and ancient plant biodiversity. Methods and techniques of the project were the spatial study of Therasia rural architecture and settlement sites, the systematic identification of modern plants, the ethnographical and archaeobotanical study, and lastly, the molecular biology. Therasia is a very small island of only 9 kilometers, situated in the volcanic complex of Santorini, right across it into the Cycladic archipelago in the Aegean Sea in Greece. The island can be characterized as a closed, isolated system with unexplored natural environment and rural and agricultural heritage. The island shows a unique cultural landscape and plant diversity in relation to rural activity and the changing pattern of the island inhabited sites diachronically. Previous scientific work on the island includes archaeological survey of the island, geological, architectural, and anthropological studies that have been accomplished within the framework of the Thales project. The landscape of Therasia, as known today, is mainly the result of the Minoan volcanic eruption that took place 3,500 years before present, and all the volcanic material that is tephra, ace, or aspa coming from this covered the pre-existing slopes. Most scientists argue that during the pre-eruption period before the late Bronze Age, The island of Santorini and Therasia together formed a ring-shaped individual island with a flooded caldera in the middle. The island comprised very diverse landforms from today, sheltered bays, plains, valleys, and low hills that were covered by the ash of the volcanic explosion. After the volcanic Minoan explosion in late Bronze Age, thick layers of volcanic ash or pumice, otherwise they call it, covered the early Bronze Age settlement of Koimisis and Therasia, and the pre-existed subsoil made of limestones, the valleys, the hills, where the early and middle people, period of the early and middle period people lived. The climate of Therasia is characterized by as extremely dry Mediterranean, where the winters are cool with very strong and violent winds and storms. The summers are dry with long days of drought. The water from rainfall usually is not being absorbed in the ground and does not retain the necessary nutrients for successful harvest and cultivation, either to the volcanic ash or to the many torrents and ravines that run through the island, which were formed during the Minoan eruption. Today, all cultivations are arid or dry, capable to withstand aridity and water shortage. As far as vegetation is concerned, the island is dominated by Frigana, Macquarie, and Carrig, with evergreen sclerophyll shrubs, less of course, and herbaceous plants, many of them in the island. Nevertheless, in the Bronze Age was slightly more favorable for plant growth than today. In Santorini, at least, as wood charcoal macro remains has shown, there was a woody vegetation which was mainly characterized by pine forests with areas of deciduous open oak woodland, Macquarie and Carrick vegetation, as well as cultivated fields. Trees such as Pinus, Aeolea, Quercus, Juniperus, Cypressus, Arbutus, Lonicera, and trees from the family of Maloidae were dominating. As far as reconstructing Therasia Bronze Age vegetation, charcoal analysis from the settlement of Koimisis by Dr. Antigone Mavromatis is ongoing, and many interesting results are to be announced soon. All the settlements of Therasia emerged from late medieval time to the mid-20th century and were built and dug out in the volcanic soil. These traditional architectural features are unique, and Therasia is the only area of Greece where these are preserved. In modern Therasia, only few villages are inhabited all year round today, such as Manolas, Potamos, and Riva. All the other residential areas are abandoned, consisting of rupestral settlements, cave dwellings that were built and dug out in the volcanic soil in the medieval period. The rural economy and activity of Therasia has changed considerably in the last century due to internal migration of the Theracian inhabitants and to increased tourism development, with only a small percentage of the island being cultivated today. The deserted rural landscape today is characterized by uncultivated terraces, destroyed paths, semi-destroyed dry stone walls, ruined mills, half-buried threshing floor, cisterns, etc. The dominant anthropogenic morphological elements of the island are the dry stone walls and the terraces. The study of plant diversity in Therasia is conducted at different levels and scales. Arc2Plant research agronomist Evangelia Stavridou has recorded and collected plants from all over the island, emphasizing the flora related to rural architecture and abandoned residential sites. These are the deliverables of the rural architecture by Kostas Athanasiou and Evangelia Stavridou. Now, as far as the human activity in Therasia through agricultural practices, dietary habits, and the uses of plants, there are ethnographical research, field work, oral interviews, archival study, and toponyms provide information on the traditional crops, plants, and the relation of cultivation with rural structures. Knowledge of traditional crops gets lost in Therasia due to declining population, internal migration, etc. For this reason, ethnographical research related to the plant uses until recent times constituted one of the basic research parameters to record the almost forgotten Therasia rural history. This was conducted in 2022 in 3 periods. Oral interviews from more than 50 inhabitants were the backbone of information extraction and farming, and all this is dated 100 years ago, before the introduction of mechanized modes of production. Most valuable informants were the elders, since nowadays traditional farming practices are no longer practiced in the island. Furthermore, I would like to thank for his advices on this research Professor Paul Hallstatt. Aim of the ethnographical study is to understand in depth the relationship of the inhabitants with the plants, animals, and the natural environment. For this reason, a detailed questionnaire with 18 questions were formed based on the objectives of the ethnographical study. These questions concerned the traditional crop plants that were cultivated, the ways of food production and consumption, and many more referring to the traditional agriculture. The inhabitants of Therasia, as the results have shown, practiced a mixed farming, where agriculture was supplemented by the animal husbandry in various ways. The farmers themselves were also animal breeders alongside. The only people so-called Dagoyates were specialized in keeping many draft animals or transportation animals, mules and donkeys. Core activity of the inhabitants was farming, and more than 90% of the island was arable land, whereas the remaining land consisted of rock cliffs, garrig, and the caldera, of course. The richest farmer had more than 1 hectare of land and big flocks, whereas the medium class, less than 1 hectare of land and few animals. The cereals cultivated in non-mechanized ways by the inhabitants of Therasia until recent times were barley, the halt and 6-row barley was the main cultivation in arable fields, was also a winter crop and sown in autumn. Barley flour was the main ingredient of their food for making a local bread, coulures, as I will say to you later, and each straw, the byproducts of crop processing, were the main ingredient for animal feeding. Wheat was rarely cultivated, and free threshing was hardly known. Nevertheless, when this was done, its cultivation of the free threshing wheat was done in small areas of fields and not big ones, like barley did. Rarity of free threshing wheat in Therasia perhaps reflects its inability for great returns, high production yields due to aridity, according to the testimonies of the inhabitants. In contrary, in other parts of Cyclades, free threshing wheat was most known and cultivated more often. Common durum wheat was only used for human consumption in Therasia and never as animal feed, unlike the barley that was used in both. Hard wheat such as emmer and einkorn were completely unknown to the inhabitants of Therasia and were not cultivated at all, even if in Santorini and Amorgos in Cyclades were already known. Millet was another cereal crop cultivated often in Therasia. It was cultivated in spring and in summer, and it was intended as both human and animal food. Barley was used for family consumption and not as a cash crop. The barley flour formed the basis of their daily food that was made into kouloures, that is a type of pretzels, barley rusks, or today what they eat in Crete, paksimadi. And in Crete, actually, it is very known, this product. And this kouloures was baked in specific private or community ovens. Kouloures was made only for barley and not from wheat. They did not have bread made from wheat, since was very rare. Sometimes barley seeds were coarsely or fine grounded in watery hand mills so as to make chondros or grounded cereal or groats. The same dish they were making with millet that was grounded in ground stones. Furthermore, barley straw, or the byproducts from the threshing and winnowing of this crop, was much valued as animal feed due to the lack of rich grazing vegetation and land in Therasia. This fodder was stored usually in the caves or in the Rupestrian caves, settlement sites, and in the Rupestrian buildings for the winter, where the animals were staying. Millet was used as well as animal feed, usually was given to birds. Ovens. These are the ovens made of stone and bricks in the abandoned settlement of Agrilia in Therasia. The kouloures were baked in these ovens, usually in large quantity for the entire village. This is concerned only for that the oven on the left, whereas for that the oven on the right, that is smaller, they were cooking food, the daily food as well, not only kouloures. The larger ovens were privately owned, but used by all the villagers without payment to bake the kouloures in large quantities at intervals. The small private ovens that each household had in its home were used daily to bake food. Not all residents had large ovens for baking bread, but few did. They offered their large ovens to periodically bake the kouloures of all their fellow villagers. The most important pulse crop, used either for personal consumption or as a cash crop, both as human and animal food, was Spanish vegetable, Lathyrus claymenum, so-called locally aracas or faba, a local species that is cultivation gets lost. In the Mediterranean, fava is generally the dish made from grounded pulse seeds. That is common pea, grass pea, and broad bean. Nevertheless, in Therasia is made exclusively from Lathyrus claymenum and has a recognized brand name in Santorini. Other species of pulses cultivated was wild lentils, possibly cultivated lentils, chickpea, black-eyed beans, and broad beans. The wild lentil, as the inhabitants of Thracia and Santorini call it, is a species lost nowadays from the island. Was rarely intended for human consumption and was never cooked. In contrast, it was used mainly as a green manure or fertilizer only in the summer crops, such as tomatoes. Most probably, it is identified to Vicia articulata, since similar descriptions of this species come from Santorini as well, from where it has probably recognized by archaeobotanist and ethnographer Anaya Sarpaki nowadays. Barley was harvested in June and July. Other crops harvested at this time were common pea and broad beans. Harvesting was always done by hand, easily uprooting the plant because the soil was very light from the volcanic ash. Reap ears of barley were bundled and collected. The work of reaping was not simple and required many hands and various processes, as Irina Sirigu here in the interview says to us, and I write in the PowerPoint what she says for this. The harvest of fava or aracas or Lathyrus claymenum was always done in May, when it ripens and is mature for collecting it, was harvested by hand due to the lightness of the volcanic soil. Threshing floors are many in the island. More than 260 threshing floors have been counted from Kostas Athanasiou and Evi Stavriou, my colleagues in this project, in this very small island of 9 kilometers of distance. Others are big and others are small threshing floors, depending on the numbers of animals, usually mules, working in them and the amount of crop harvest sacks. All these were private properties of families who had their fields nearby and used to thresh their crops either for themselves or for neighbors, without payment, who also had fields very close to these threshing floors. The working animals, mules and donkeys used in threshing belonged to the Agoyates, those specialized in raising these animals, and their payment was the straw, the byproducts of barley and fava, to feed the animals, whereas the clean seeds were given back to the farmer. No threshing sledges were used in these threshing floors, and work was done only by trampling the harvested crop with mules or donkeys. The threshing floors were being operated and shared among the farmers of Therasia. Usually the Agoyates threshed the crop. Instead of money, they collected all the straw from the farmers to feed their animals. Processing after threshing comprises many works done in the house, like multiple sievings with coarse and fine sieving, and grinding in stone mills. Usually barley was being ground in wind mills for making flour, whereas arachas almost always was grounded in water stone hand mills for making fava. Of fruits, the main species cultivated in most of the island was the vine. These grapevines are called theonovia, that means centuries old, because survive more than 100 years and thrive, capable of making wine for hundreds of years, according to the informants. Most characteristic viticulture technique in the area is the coulura, that is the cup-shaped turned of or the real formation system of the vine. It is a unique technique that has been preserved over the centuries, and it is perfectly harmonized and influenced by the climatic condition of the place. This practice of making the vine buried in the earth is adapted to hold water from rainfall or night humidity in the soil and to protect them from the strong winds of Cyclades. The peculiar character of the Santorini Theracian wine comes primarily from the island's unique volcanic ground and the microclimate, which is arid, along with a dense night fog, offering the needed humidity. This is the vine harvest that was done in late August, early September. Wine production was the most important economic activity of the inhabitants of Therasia, like in Santorini. The main local grape varieties for making wine are Assyrtiko, Aidani, Athiri, Mavrotragano, Mandilaria, which produce high-quality wines. The most famous wine of Santorini, of course, is the Vino Santo, that is the sweet wine that is done after drying the grapes under the sun. Wine were made mainly in the wine cellars called canava, and Theracian Santorini wine was tradable and exchangeable with areas outside the island from which the inhabitants made a monetary profit. Apart from wine of Therasia, they were making raisins, the dried grapes in the sun. Fig and prickly pears were not cultivated on the island, but were mainly harvested for human consumption. Other foods cultivated in orchards were various short trees. Other cultivation were mainly summer crops, such as tomatoes, from which they were making sauce. In some cases, in the field, they were cultivating sesame and cotton too. In the perivoglia or gardens, they were cultivating various vegetables, such as the so-called gules or brassica oleracea, probably. that is a species of cabbage, and onions. Most famous wild plant that they were collecting is the capper. A great variety of other wild grasses were collected by the inhabited. Many types of cultivated fields were known in Therasia, which were dominating all the areas of Ireland. Baxetes, that is the vegetable fields, vegetable gardens, fields with summer and crops, that is, vines or arga, that is the arable land, the fields of araka or fava, barley, common pea, cotton and woolens. From the cultivation techniques, following was a very limited practice generally, and only farmers with more than 1 hectare almost could apply. In contrast, they persuaded more on crop rotation. That was the norm, with barley or aracas cultivated in 1 year in a field and the next summer crop. This would give them always food resource. One other practice was that of intercropping the vineyards with aracas and black-eyed beans. The spreading of dung in Therasia was the most important key for success of the crop yield in the arid condition of the island. The second key for success was the multiple plowings of the ground with mule or donkeys before manure was spread or after the September rainfalls. The animal manure were gathered all year around, always in the stalls, in the Rupestrian caves, which were processed further, making a very good fertilizer. This was collected every September from the stalls and transported with donkeys in the cultivated fields. In every type of field, they were applying different amount of manure. After the dung was left in the fields for drying, and after the first rainfall, the first plowing with a mouthboard was done. After that, a second one with a wooden arm. Dung was not used as fuel at all in Therasia, in contrast to Santorini, where it is already known the cavallines, that is the dung piles that they were using as fuel. Whereas in Therasia, fuel was consisting of the vine prunings and fig branches. The multiple plowings of the field, as I already told you. As far as animal husbandry is concerned, sheep, goats were the main domestic animals that were raised for meat, milk, and cheese, as well as for wool. Donkeys and mules were the most important draft animals, using with yoke or in plowing all type of lands. Donkeys as well was the main mode of transportation in the island, especially in the inaccessible fields in ravines close to torrents. In contrast to the other island of Cyclades, ox and cows were not considered necessary for plowing the land because these animals are slow for the walk in the land in this island in Therasia. The main activity of the inhabitants was agriculture, and most of the island was filled with arable land, whereas a very small percentage of the island was left uncultivated or was intended for pasture. So the animals were fed mainly on what came from the agricultural harvest, from the straw, from the processing of barley or fava. As far as archaeobotanical studies is concerned, plant macro remains comes from the settlement of Koimisis in Therasia. The settlement is dated in the early and middle Bronze Age, when it was definitely abandoned. The excavation is directed by Kostas Bonia from 2015 to 2022. The site emerges as an important settlement located on an imposing hilltop to the west side of the pro-eruption Santorini caldera and along the brow of the east caldera of the island. The remains, the houses, and the buildings of the early and middle Bronze Age were covered by volcanic ash of the late Bronze Age volcanic explosion, and for this reason were very well preserved. Characteristic architectural features are the ellipsoid and apsidal houses that are embedded in the bedrock. Many other stone-made buildings paved paths and the underground pit came to light. 140 soil samples were collected for the recovery of bioarchaeological remains, plant macro-remains, charcoal, animal, and fish bones. From 2015 to 2022 excavation periods was collected these 140 soil samples. However, in 2021 and in 2022 field season, systematic sampling of archaeological strata was applied since a flotation machine was installed in Therasia by Kostas Athanasiou, Kostas Bonios, and the writer. Previously, it was not sampling so much systematic, as they were picking the soil sparsely. Soil samples were processed with a flotation machine or a water sieve, the type of Ankara. The material was collected in 2 sheaves, and the heavy residue on a plastic mesh with an ongoing opening of 1 millimeter. Flotation and sorting of heavy residue has been done in Therasia during the excavation period. Sorting of plant remains from all samples has been accomplished, as well as the identification of plant macro remains in the laboratory of the Department of Archaeology in Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. More than 1,300 liters of soil were processed by water flotation. From the 140 samples in total, were recovered almost 2,000 plant remains. The areas with an abundance of plant macro remains, where I found thousands of plants, and as well a high density, were found in floors in room 3 and 4 from trench B in the northwest part of the settlement. As shown in the graphs, more than 1,200 plant remains were preserved in the northwest sector of the excavated area. That is probably domestic space, rooms with domestic use. And the spatial analysis showed 13 large concentration of plant macro remains in various areas of the excavated settlement, mainly coming from the fields of floors, indoors and outdoors of buildings, dating to different periods of time from the early and middle Bronze Age, as the analysis showed that the deposition of the plant remains took place during separate depositional episodes, especially in the northwest area. The Archaeobotanical study indicated a variety of cereals, from free-facing cereals, barley is the dominant, represented by grains and raceses, have been identified hulled and naked 6-row raceses of barley frequently found, and less so the hulled 2-row, whereas based on seeds, only the hulled form has been identified. Very few are the finds of free-threshing wheat, represented by only 1 seed and 1 rachis of Triticum durum, the tetraploid wheat. From glue wheat, AMR is prevailing, which is represented by many gloom bases and spikelet fox that are frequent and in abundance, whereas the seeds are very few. As shown in the table, a great variety of cereals are represented in Therasia. Worth mentioning the presence of Triticum tivum fevi, or the new gloom, previously known as new gloom wheat, first time found in Cyclades, which is represented by gloom bases and spikelet fox only. Einkorn has not been found at all. Among pulses, Spanish Wetzling, Lathyrus claimenum, and grass pea, Lathyrus cicera or sativa, are the most frequent in the assemblage of Therasia. Other pulse species represented are lentils, common pea, and broad bean, seeds of which were found sparsely and in low numbers. As shown in the table, legumes found in Therasia are 5, showing as well a great variety. Plant parts that were found were gloom bases that prevail, seeds of cereal and pulses, raceses that are less in numbers, seeds of wild taxa, and various fruit and nuts. The composition of samples in crop is heterogeneous, mixed and suggest, of course, mixing of plant remains from a different crop processing stages. Emergence bases are dominated in many samples. These are usually found with barley seeds and raxes. From fruits, fig seeds have been found in all the samples, and they are frequent in a high amount. Other fruit nuts found sparsely and low quantities are olive stones, almond, prunus amygdalus, and perhaps grape pipe. As shown in the graph, fig is the most frequent and in higher numbers than the others. Wild flora is characterized by a wide variety. Seeds of various families and genus species as well have been found. The major part of the wild flora are typical weeds of crops such as Gallum aparine, Bromus, Avena, Chenopodium, Fumari, and Polygonum. Nevertheless, some wild taxa are coming from other sources than the harvest of the crops, such as wetland or riparian species, Carex and Uncus, which most probably derive from dung of animal grazing on wetland pasture or habitats near the sea. The distribution of plant concentration in space and in time indicates similarities and differences in human behavior related to the inhabited area and the use of plants, the specific use of space as well in relation to plants, and finally the depositional activities and the various taphonomic episodes. For this reason, the spatial analysis has been completed. Here we see the topographical plant and generally the archaeobotanical composition of some of the Therasian samples. We see that the composition is mixed and heterogeneous. Some samples, as these two that come from floors of the northwest part of the settlement and dating in early Cycladic period in space 3 and 4 are dominated by wild taxa, and the same we notice from the space 4 of the same trends and building. And some other samples are mixed in equal quantities of fruits and nuts, such as sample this sample 111 to 114 from trends in the northwest part of the area, that is that we counter in equal quantities of fruits and nuts. However, mainly the samples, generally speaking, are dominated by bloom bases of Emmer and less of Triticum timofevi, mixed with barley seeds and few rachises. As the spatial analysis suggests, different crop processing stages are represented by the plant micro-remains. The mixed samples contain byproducts from early winnowing and late husking and seeding crop processing stages, such as awns, rachises, and bloom bases and wild seeds, respectively, that constitute most probably remnants of fuel for cooking. The seeds of cultivated plants were probably the ingredients used for the preparation of meals that became charred during cooking. All these were mixed secondarily, suggesting secondary or tertiary refuse. Overall, different routes of provenance are recounted, and there were separate depositional episodes. The variation in sample composition between the various floors and different parts of this in the settlement suggests that the deposition of the plant remains took place during separate depositional episodes. The major part represent disposal episodes from domestic activities such as burning of fuel or spent fuel used for cooking, containing processing byproducts from early winnowing and late crop processing stages. The seeds of cultivated plant, as already told you, referred to you, were probably the ingredients used for the preparation of meals that became charred during the cooking. in fire. All types of chaff come from different crop processing stages, and all the above suggest the piecemeal cleaning of cereal grain from chaff or cleaning piecemeal during the year within the settlement. Furthermore, this shows that the grain of barley and bloom wheat and various pulses were intended for human consumption, as this laborious and time-consuming processing and cleaning would not be undertaken for further production. Generally speaking, these are the routine and everyday activities of the inhabitants of the Theracian settlement that produced regular and small quantities of grain and discarded chaff. Furthermore, in the assemblage of Therasia, there are to be found the wild seeds, most probably deriving from dung, such as the probably carex seeds or other water-loving plants. This species typical riparian, if it is the identification right, and these are to be found and are dominant in water marshland. The seeds of the species remain intact after digestion by animals and charring, as ethnographical work has shown in Turkey. Seeds of carex are dominant, with more than 120 seeds in samples from an area near a retained wall in northwest corner of the settlement, and could suggest that there was a stall there. In situ could be the remnants of dung deriving from grazing animals used for fuel and secondarily refused in the area. The wide range of cultivated crops from Bronze Age Therasia shows that diversification in crop cultivation constituted one important buffering mechanism. Barley is the most important cereal in the past and in recent times in Therasia, perhaps because withstands aridity and is tolerant to drought. Bloom wheat is in contrast with the recent and modern crop repertoire was as important as was barley in Theracian Bronze Age, probably suggesting not so arid condition or a different landscape and climatic condition in prehistoric period. The total absence of einkorn and the predominance of emmer in Therasia, in contrast to other settlements of Cyclades, such as Thessaloniki and Akrotiri, where einkorn is found alongside emmer, shows a different culinary choice or different cultural or economic preference of the inhabitants of Therasia in Bronze Age from the others in Cyclades. The findings of Triticum timofevi or new bloom wheat is of paramount importance because constitute the first record from this part of Aegean, as we already know from publications of Tania Valamotti and others recently, that Triticum timofevi mostly is represented in North Aegean and not so much in Southern Aegean. Legumes seems to have been very important in the prehistoric diet and would have had the ability to restore nitrogen to a tired soil. Generally, seeds of Lathyrus claymenum from Therasia, Akrotiri and Klossos, as well as from Amurgo and Daskalio, suggest that this rare crop process possesses properties particularly suited to the local environment, since it is tolerant to arid conditions. The presence as well of dung remains from some samples of Therasia constitutes a unique evidence from the Cyclades in the Bronze Age. Even if dung was in recent years in Therasia one of the most important fertilizers of the crop fields, there has not been attested in archaeobotanical data, not from stable isotopes, but only from the plant remains, that has not been attested from settlement of the Aegean Sea, of the South Aegean Sea, like Cyclades and Crete, as far as I know. The findings of fig are high in amount, and the diverse range of fruit-bearing species such as almond and the presence of olives are in accordance with the suggestion that arboriculture took place in the Aegean from probably early or middle Cycladic period onwards. Our aim is to have very soon the synthesis and bring all the data from the work of causes of Aegean Bronze so as to get the narrative about residential development and lifestyle on the islands from prehistoric to modern times. Generally speaking, we know already that crop diversification has been claimed as an important parameter in the emergence of palatial society. Indeed, in Therasia, that is from the early to middle Bronze Age, we have a great diversity and variety of crops and wild plant resources. Characteristic of early Bronze Age, as we already know, is the settlement growth and early forms of urbanizations. Questions to be answered when more data are to be added in the Archaeobotanical archive are as far as cultivation practices is concerned. Was it necessary the cultivation of less fertile land and grazing animals in more marginal land? Is it the labor intensive? Was there high yielding husbandry with cereal pass rotation in Bronze Age, manuring or weeding as far as the Cyclades is concerned, of course, because from Crete the stable isotopes and publication from colleagues such as Therasia, Kidon, Bogart has thrown light on this for the early Bronze Age, the Neolithic period as well, and suggests that there was manuring in this site applying. Generally speaking, plant subsistence in Cyclades seems to follow the same trajectories with Crete. This because in early Bronze Age Cyclades, as far as we know from Therasia and of course from the Scalio that Evi Margariti has already studied. For example, emmer and barley are frequent as well in Amorgos as well. In Therasia, of course, are most common because, as I said to you before, Aincon is present in Dascalon, not in Therasia. Hand barley, generally speaking, emerald free threshing wheat, and the cereals that have been deliberately cultivated in Crete for sure. And these are the cereals that they were domesticated from Neolithic period in Crete as well. So we see here a continuation of this cultivation of crops in early Bronze Age in Cyclades. Lastly, Spanish vegetable Lathyrus claymenum and Cyprus veg Lathyrus ocrus that it is found in Crete since the early Bronze Age and as well in Cyclades reflect evidence of local or South Aegean culinary traditions and are suitable and adapt better in the ecology and environmental circumstances of this arid area. And this is something, a point that has been already highlighted by Levarte Kojamani. Thank you so much, and I would like to thank as well Kostas Athanasiou and Davis Stavridou that gave to me the opportunity to study this material and do the research. Kostas Bonia for helping me and give the material to study to me, and Tanya Valamotti for the whole help with the laboratory at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Thank you so much.